Nearly half of the country's revenues are disbursed through the federal government to the 36 states and 774 local governments to provide basic education, health services, and local infrastructure. But the federal government was often wrongly accused of not disbursing such state and local government funds. This happened when teachers were not paid or local roads not repaired, because state and local government resources for this had been corruptly diverted by officials at that level. They would make the federal government the scapegoat to divert attention from themselves. To counter this, we started publishing in local newspapers and online the monthly allocations to federal, state, and local governments. This brought transparency to people. It brought information with which to hold their leaders accountable. They could now place the blame where it belonged for unpaid teachers, empty rural clinics, and poor local roads. Also for limiting corruption, exposing tens of thousands of ghost workers on government payrolls, and making it easier to track public expenditures to ensure they were leading to results. We saved just over $1 billion for government coffers by weeding out ghost workers who became ghost pensioners from the payroll. Let me now turn to contemporary problems of illicit trade, where better systems and institutions, this time at the international level, will also be critical for addressing the problem of corruption in the trading system. Illicit trade refers to cross-border trade in goods or services that are themselves illegal: narcotics, endangered wildlife, stolen natural resources, or cultural artifacts, counterfeit or pirated products, products that are being traded by illegal means, or for instance, by misclassification for tariff purposes, by underreporting of unit prices, or by under-declaration of product quantities. Much of this is enabled by corrupt public officials who take bribes and look the other way. Global trade in counterfeit and pirated goods alone has been estimated by the OECD at about $500 million, around 3.3% of world trade. Looking at Africa, UNCTAD estimates that trade-related illicit financial flows out of the continent were roughly $40 billion. Commodities with a high value to weight ratio like gold, diamonds, and platinum accounted for 95% of the underinvoicing, with petroleum and base metals making up most of the rest. Africa loses about $88.6 billion, 3.7% of its gross domestic product annually in illicit financial flows. A significant amount of this attributable to illicit trade. This amount is half of Africa's annual SDG financing gap, itself estimated at $200 billion. Illicit trade denies governments revenue, weakens the legitimacy of global governance institutions, distorts competition among businesses, and encourages deforestation, biodiversity loss, and other kinds of environmental degradation. It can also be a direct threat to people's health and well-being. Take the issue of illicit trade in medicines. One estimate suggests that fake medicines for malaria and tuberculosis potentially kill over 700,000 people every year, and that 1/3 of anti-malarial drugs in sub-Saharan Africa contain no active pharmaceutical ingredient. Illicit trade in live animals, often by means of misclassification or underpricing an imported species, hurts animal health and is also associated with zoonotic diseases in humans. In fact, the first recorded case of avian flu in the European Union back in October 2004 came from a live eagle that had been illegally transported from Thailand in hand luggage before being seized at the Brussels airport. The present pandemic is not exempt from corrupt practices, as we already heard. There have been a few reports of corruption in relation to the COVID-19 response, with firms in some countries being awarded contracts for supply of medical goods and pharmaceuticals despite dubious expertise. In Honduras, for example, there are reports of the outgoing government of President Juan Orlando Hernandez allegedly ordering modular vehicular COVID-19 ICU units at about $60,000 apiece. The WHO said in August that counterfeit vaccines had been seized in India and Africa, and its medical product alert system reported falsified vaccines in Iran in October. There have also been reports of fraudulent diagnostics in countries around the world, and more recently, fraudulent vaccine certificates. On the whole, however, there is no reason or great evidence to believe that there has been corruption in private sector vaccine production or distribution. But more transparency around vaccine contracts would help address perceptions that anything untoward might be occurring. The Multilateral Leaders Task Force, on which I serve, along with my colleagues, counterparts from the IMF, the World Bank, and the WHO, has been pushing hard for greater vaccine contract transparency among the major manufacturers. In a similar vein, the WTO's plurilateral government procurement agreement opens up annual procurement activities worth more than $1.7 trillion to international competition. The Open Government Partnership has shown that government procurement is one of the biggest avenues for corruption globally. The 48 members that participate in the procurement agreement commit to transparent and predictable procurement processes, with unsuccessful bidders able to seek domestic review. The 2012 revision of the agreement requires participating governments and their procuring entities to, quote, avoid conflicts of interest and, quote, prevent corrupt practices. Signing onto the agreement is one way for governments to send a signal they intend to minimize corruption in how public contracts are awarded. More than 100 WTO members are currently negotiating an agreement on investment facilitation, which also looks likely to include anti-corruption provisions and possibly even references to existing international anti-corruption instruments from the UN, the OECD, and etc. I don't want to go on too long since we have a Q&A coming up. Fighting corruption is hard and it can be dangerous. That is why I published a book in 2018 entitled Fighting Corruption is Dangerous, the story behind the headlines from MIT Press, detailing my experience in fighting corruption. The struggle against corruption is long, and the people responsible for corruption want you to give up. Taking on corruption means taking on powerful vested interests. When we crack down on fraudulent claims for oil subsidy payments in Nigeria, with the aim of allocating the money saved into job creation, public works, and social safety nets for poor people, it infuriated some corrupt oil marketers who had been making billions on such claims. Despite these challenges, fighting corruption is possible and must be done. Fighting it is more likely to succeed in countries with a strong anti-corruption coalition, backed by political support, clear goals, good communications, along with an effective independent judiciary. International partners can help in various ways, but there's absolutely no replacement for domestic action. Fighting corruption is necessary. The vast majority of people are not corrupt, and in my country, this is very much so. Their lives and livelihoods suffer when corruption diverts resources and stymies growth. They deserve better.